Sonobe to give his welcome remarks. Dean Sonobe.
Okay, thank you. Good day. Greetings from Tokyo. I'm delighted to welcome you to the ADBI-JARTS learning series on high-speed rail. The indicator on my PC shows that we are having about 115 viewers. I heard that participants have registered from as many as 20 countries. I appreciate high interest of the participants in this webinar and its theme, and also the efforts of co-organizers, Japan Railway Technical Service, or JARTS, IIT Madras and IIT Kanpur, World Congress of Transport Research Society, as well as Dr. Sitaram and his team, to hold such a timely and relevant event. More specifically, my thanks go to Mr. Kono, the president of JATS, Professor Sudhir Misra from IIT Kanpur, and Professor Ashwin Mahalingam and Dr. Nikhil Bugalia from IIT Madras for their support and collaboration to prepare and deliver this session. Welcome speakers, Dr. Gill from Manchester School of Business, the University of Manchester, and Professor Davies from Science Policy Research Unit, University of Sussex, who will share the experiences of and lessons learned from projects in the United Kingdom, and panelists Mr. Prasad and Mr. Padak, who will share on the situation of high-speed rail projects in India. This learning series session aims to add the work in building a common platform where practitioners can share their experiences and lessons learned with policymakers, planners, transportation managers, and researchers in Asia. This is the first of several sessions and starts with the topic of Megaproject governance and innovation. Dr. Gill will first discuss the challenges of the value creation of megaprojects. Then Professor Davies will discuss opportunities for innovation in megaprojects, specifically looking at the experience of the Crossrail project in the UK. I look forward to these presentations and the discussions that will follow. We will continue this learning series with more sessions throughout the year on topics such as rolling stock and safety. Now it's my pleasure to invite Professor Mahalingam to introduce the first speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Sonobe.
Thank you very much, Dean Sonobe. It is my pleasure now to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Nuno Gill. Dr. Nuno Gill is a professor at the Manchester School of Business, received his PhD at the University of California, Berkeley, and has been researching mega projects in many countries for several years, and has very interesting ideas in terms of why you have cost and time overruns on these projects and the nature of governance structures on these kinds of mega projects. And so without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Professor Nuno Gill to share some of his thoughts with us. Nuno, over to you.
Okay, thanks very much for the kind introduction, Ashwin. It's a pleasure to be here in this platform today, and thanks for the invitation to speak to this distinguished panel. I'll share my screen. I prepared a few slides to illustrate my talk, so let's just bear with me for a few seconds. And I think would you confirm that you can see my screen?
We can see your screen, but could you put it into full screen mode?
Let me check. Like that?
Yes, perfect. Go ahead.
Okay. So actually, when I was thinking on the presentation, I thought about the title again, and I thought, what can I say here in about 10 minutes? And so what I'll do is, like, I will do a call for us to rethink the way we see these enterprises, these capital-intensive enterprises, and I will straight my call for change in paradigm with some examples from the UK. Of course, this is about railways, and that's kind of the motivation for this session. And railways are a fascinating phenomenon. No? It seems that the world can't get enough of them. No, so we see calls to connect Africa with a network of high-speed railways. It's happening in the Middle East. It's happening in India. It's happening in the UK. We have high-speed railways being built in the US. So all over the world. But these are extremely contentious projects, and they are contentious for different reasons. No, so they are contentious because they often create winners and losers. No, there'll be people that they will go through areas of outstanding natural beauty, and that will disappoint many activists and some local communities. They will require people to be displaced, farmers, and I have an example there from India where, of course, local communities don't want to be displaced, and again they will feel that they are the loser in this enterprise, and they will try to oppose. They will the other people will oppose these projects, perhaps because of they don't see them as a way in the right direction towards a decarbonized world. Other people will, of course, be opposed on the grounds that it seems very difficult to keep these projects on budget and within the initial time scales. And indeed, I was just I Googled performance of high-speed railway projects all over the world, and we can see again and again that these projects tend to derail in terms of initial cost targets and initial time scales. And that is true for India, it is true for the UK, it is true for the US, it is true a bit all over the world. So what's going on here? Why are these cost hikes and delays? Why are they the norm? And to illustrate that, I'll just show you that what's going on in the UK right now. So as some of you may be aware, the UK is trying to build a railway network, a high-speed railway network, which is the first the UK is trying to build since the Victorian times. So for more than 100 years, hardly any significant railway lines have been built north of London. And this project started in when they set up the company ISP2 Limited. It was 2009, so more than 10 years ago. And at the time, it was a relatively small budget, less than 20 billion, and these days, if we are talking in cash prices, so 11, 12 years later, we have a budget that has already reached over 70 billion, and it continues to going up. And this budget we have hardly started the construction, actually. So you can see the slide there in terms of the spent on ISP2. It has been so far, after 10 years, the country has spent over 4 billion, and construction just started last year. No, but during this process of planning the railway, what can be built, the costs have significantly escalated, and you can see the timescales as well, which are, if you come from China, it's almost difficult to understand how come you take almost half a century to build 600, 700 kilometers. you would not understand that. So what's going on here? So why are these cost hikes and delays, why are they the norm? In addition to that, another issue that practitioners and the mega project leaders and the governors of these enterprises face is this white elephant syndrome. It's very difficult to escape from this syndrome. And the reason for that, and again, I illustrate with the case of high-speed 2, on the bottom, you have the evolution of the benefit to cost ratio with and without wider economic impacts. And even if you include the wider economic impacts, you will see that initially the benefit to cost ratio in 2009 was something about 2.5, 2.9. So basically, it creates almost 3 pounds of value for each pound spent of public investment. These days, in 2020, the latest evaluation suggests that the benefit to cost ratio is around 1.1, 1.2 without wider economic impacts. And if you include wider economic impacts, it's between 1.3 and 1.5. And so many people argue, why are we doing this? There will be projects that would create a lot more value for money. So we are building a white elephant at the time when we have a country that is under significant fiscal pressures, and there will be many other things that should be prioritized relatively to this network. So where does this leave us? What can we do as mega project leaders, as governors, as sponsors, as promoters, as financiers of these large enterprises? What I would say is that we need a change, a fundamental change in paradigm. We have a lot of work to do to educate the public, civil society about what are we doing, why are we doing it, and why these enterprises behave the way they behave. And that requires a fundamental change in paradigm. And unless we do that, it will be extremely difficult to bridge this gap between what happens in the real world, the behavior, the systematic behavior of these mega projects, and the expectations in the environment as to how they should be behaving. And this is the root of the problem. The root of the problem is this small triangle that is almost 100 years old. And it's sometimes called the project's golden triangle. I have some friends that say it should be the lead triangle because it's just bringing the industry to its knees. And this paradigm was developed, which basically frames our understanding of performance of projects around three vectors: time, cost, and scope. And so according to this paradigm, a good project, high-performing project, is one that is delivered on time, within budget, and that freezes the scope as early as possible. Now, perhaps this was true 100 years ago, when there was no internet, when there was no social media, when the decision-making authority was highly centralized in the promoting bodies of mega projects. But this paradigm is just totally anachronic. The world after 100 years is in a significantly different place, and somehow we have not been able to get rid of this perception that unless we deliver on time, within cost, and we freeze the scope early as possible, we are not doing our jobs, and we just can't meet this normative expectation. So what I suggest as part of this fundamental change in paradigm, the first thing is that we need to widen the definition of value. The value that, and if you go back to the assessment of value for high-speed 2 in the UK, it was about user willingness to pay, the economic benefits that are created by a railway, plus some wider economic benefits in terms of the increase of productivity in the cities that are connected by the railway, minus costs. And that is an extremely narrow view of value that does not reflect the pressures from society as to how we should manage and govern these projects. And of course, then as you negotiate the project through the environment and you attend to legitimate interests of key stakeholder groups, you have to make significant concessions. You have to build tunnels when you are going to cross areas of outstanding natural beauty, when initially perhaps you thought you would be able to build the viaduct. You may have to increase the scope of the railway stations because local authorities believe that more grandiose stations can be catalysts of urban regeneration and economic growth. You have to make more concessions to local communities that are affected. You have perhaps to increase the compensation for stakeholders that have to be displaced. You have to make late changes in alignment, again, to attend to legitimate interests of your stakeholders. So all those concessions, which are very difficult to predict early on, now it's about bounded rationality. We don't have a magic wand in 2009 that says, well, this is everything that I need to do so that all my stakeholders are going to be happy. That's not the way it works. A lot of these emerging legitimate interests, emerge along the way throughout the planning process, throughout democratic negotiations. But these concessions that the industry tends to frame as risks, and they are risks because they can lead to cost overruns, that can lead to delays, they are actually value creating. They create social gains. They concessions these days to decarbonize the projects. Of course, there will be sometimes also social losses that we also need to mitigate. But unless we add another dimension to the way we assess value, we will not be able to get out of this major challenge that we have. And right now, what we do is social value is zero. We don't measure. So we assume it is zero. And that's why on the benefit to cost ratio, as you progress with these projects, it seems that the project is becoming more and more on the white elephant when it's not the case. Another example is creating jobs. More and more, these projects are instruments of job creation. Those jobs create social value, local value. But again, it may come with some cost in terms of hiring and training, and we need to accept that. There's no such thing as a free lunch in this environment. So my last slide, and what I would say is that in a world today where enterprises are operating under massive pressure to attend to ESG, environmental concerns, social concerns, governance concerns, there is no reason that projects like railways should not be leading the way. We have a massive opportunity in our hands to show the world that industries like railways and the construction industry are at the leading edge of how we can create a better world, a better environment, and how we create organizations, in our case, project-based organizations that attend to the most pressing concerns of society these days. Concerns that how we make sure that we decarbonize our projects, how we attend to climate change concerns, to biodiversity, to energy concerns, how we make sure that we build whilst respecting human rights, we creating equal opportunities, using projects as instruments to tackle social inequality and poverty. And of course, there's massive pressure on project organizations in terms of accountability, governance, business ethics, and all that adds cost as well. How can we show ultimately to taxpayers, our principles, that we are creating value? So I would say that we have a massive opportunity in our hands to use railway projects, and in this particular case, high-speed railway projects, to show the world how to lead the way towards ESG, a more ESG compliant enterprises. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nuno. I think, and also thank you for almost perfectly aligning with the time. I think lots of interesting ideas on value and how we should measure and redefine value for mega projects. And I hope to come back to some of those when we get into the panel discussion. And I'm sure people from the audience will have some questions as well. Let me now introduce our second speaker for today. Our second speaker is Professor Andrew Davies, who is also an eminent researcher from the UK. Is currently with the Science Policy Research Unit SPRU at the University of Sussex. But Andrew again has been researching mega projects for several years now, and he's looked at them from multiple angles. But one of those is innovation, and how innovation happens on these kinds of mega projects, what kinds of systems are put in place. He's looked at projects like Crossrail, and I think he's going to tell us a little bit about that project, but also projects like the London Olympics and other mega projects in the UK and elsewhere in the world as well. So Andrew, over to you. Looking forward to hearing about your thoughts.
Okay, thanks, Ashwin. I'm sharing. You can hear me okay, right? Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you fine.
Yeah, the screen. There we are. Okay. 1 second. Okay, you can see that? Okay, great.
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much. Okay, great. Okay, so thank you everyone, and thanks for inviting me to speak on such an interesting event on a very important topic. Yeah, I'm Professor of Innovation Management in the Science Policy Research Unit, and I've been working on mega projects in different universities. Previously, I was a professor at the University College London, and before that, a reader and associate professor in Imperial College London. And in those two institutions, we've been working very closely in particular with London's mega projects. And over the past 15 years, I've been undertaking collaborative research to support innovation in large scale infrastructure projects. Projects often called mega projects because of their immense scale and complexity and issues that Nuno was talking about. So I want to briefly discuss what's been happening in the UK to drive innovation in mega projects. Okay. Yeah. There you see Heathrow Terminal 5, which is a very significant project. Before that, until around the early 2000s, most, if not all, UK infrastructure projects were late and over budget. Channel Tunnel Rail Link, linking London and Paris, was 1 year late and £1 billion over budget. The Jubilee Line extension in London, the London Underground, was 1.4 billion over budget and 2 years late. So there was a really terrible track record. And Heathrow Terminal 5, the home of British Airways, wanted to avoid such delays and overruns. British Airports Authority, the client running the project, decided that a radically different delivery strategy was needed. They brought in ideas from other industries, such as modularity and prefabrication for North Sea oil and gas, just in time from the car industry, and digital models from aerospace, and so on. So they wanted to change the delivery strategy, but place innovation and collaboration at the heart of that strategy. That strategy was really significant in terms of stimulating a new approach to project delivery based on collaboration, flexibility, and innovation. Similar ideas would be used on other projects, such as the London Olympics, and where the two main contractors working on Heathrow Terminal 5 were employed as delivery partner for the London Olympics to bring in their experience from Heathrow Terminal 5 to that project. But the key turning point in terms of innovation was the creation of a formal and systematic innovation strategy for Crossrail. And this was led by Andrew Wolstenholme, and he was previously the director of Heathrow Terminal 5, And he really wanted to bring in, he was passionate about innovation and wanted to bring those ideas into this project. And he created, Andrew Wolstenholme created a collaboration with Imperial College, where I was working at the time, to actually bring in innovation ideas to the project. Since Crossrail, most, if not all, mega projects in the UK now have innovation strategies, which they use. So let me give you a brief overview of what happened. As a result of these activities, innovation is now high on the agenda in terms of strategy and policy, as some of these reports show. The one on the right, the blue one on the right, is the original innovation strategy developed by Imperial College and senior colleagues in Crossrail. Interestingly, Mark Thurston, one of the authors of the Crossrail innovation strategy, is now chief executive of High Speed 2, the new high-speed rail link that Nuno was talking about. And High Speed 2 has adopted an innovation strategy which is similar to the one originally developed for Crossrail. When we developed the strategy for Crossrail, we found that no other project in the world had a formal innovation program. So we had to devise one from scratch. So that was the team at Imperial and the people and senior managers in Crossrail. This article, published by Andrew Wolstenholme, who's the chief executive again of Crossrail, shows that it was, you know, the world's first innovation program, and this sent a powerful message about how to drive innovation in construction projects. So you get a kind of a sense of what was going on in terms of the work we were doing. At the start of the project, we had to develop a vision statement, and this figure is based on a brainstorming session at Imperial College where we identified the purpose of innovation in a mega project. And you can see that, you know, we were looking at what lessons could be brought in from other projects, like the Channel Tunnel Rail Link, Heathrow Terminal 5 and the Olympics, how these lessons could be used to create Crossrail as a world-class railway, but the lessons would be made available for other projects, and that's indeed what has happened. The focus of innovation is innovation in how you design it, innovation in building it, and that's actually what we focused on in Crossrail, because we started quite late into the project when it was construction phase, and innovation in how you're running it. Innovation affects the product, the services, the processes, materials, and many other aspects. Okay. So what actually did we do? The innovation program was called Innovate 18. It was based on a digital platform using what some of you may know of open innovation techniques, which is a way of bringing in ideas from all members of the supply chain and indeed adjacent stakeholders like universities and so on. It was supported by a small innovation team using innovation management and an innovation management system to bring in ideas to move ideas from the idea stage to implementation on the project. A governance board met every 3 months to oversee the program and select ideas for support and funding. A pot of money was available to finance the innovation. Each major contractor provided £25,000, and this money was matched by the client. It wasn't a huge amount of money, but it did demonstrate that innovation could be used to improve the performance and outcome of a mega project. The governance board established themes to focus innovation efforts, such as safety during the construction phase, but these themes changed during the life of the project as it moved towards completion. This figure is from one of the reports that we were involved in, which summarizes the rate of innovation on the program, and it gives you an idea of some of the ideas that were implemented. Some ideas were already used elsewhere on other projects. They were simply copied and adopted. We called this pinched with pride. That means literally stolen from other areas and then spread out as quickly as possible. But many others had to be, taken from the discovery phase and moved into implementation. All of the ideas were published. Some ideas were parked. It may have been too late to implement the innovation, so they parked them, which means they kept them for use on perhaps on other projects, and we'll talk about that in a moment. these are just some of the examples that were introduced by teams working often in collaboration with universities and R&D labs elsewhere. Many of them were quite simple, like the safety glove messages. There were messages printed on safety gloves so that people were aware of the importance of safety in different phases and different parts of the project. But there were, there was a lot of new application of digital technology, of investigation of new materials like lightweight aggregate, because they were, basically taking up so much of the soil and from the project, and found different ways of using the materials that they excavated. So that just gives you kind of a bit of an overview. What were the benefits of this innovation ecosystem for the project? It's important to remember that this was a first of its kind, small-scale experiment to show how innovation could be applied during the construction phase of the project. But even at this stage, there were some positive signs that innovation could be used to improve the performance of this project. And you see that we did had a cost benefit, a performance assessment of the project, which was a benefit cost ratio of 2.1. So these were the benefits realized compared to the costs of the innovation program. By 2017, they expected this to go to a ratio of 3 to 1. But while this was small scale, it was kind of really interesting in terms of the message it sent out, as Andrew Wolstenholme was saying, that innovation is something that can be placed can be used at the start of a project and run right through the project. And there were many wider benefits that are important to consider, because it wasn't simply the innovation program, but it was actually that people were encouraged to work together to solve problems, and there was a collaborative innovation culture that was created as a result of the innovation program, which was very important. Then we see the Crossrail Innovation Programme was soon adopted on other projects such as the Thames Tideway project, the London's new sewer system, Hinkley Point C, the UK's latest nuclear reactor, and High Speed 2. Andy, who was Crossrail's Programme Director, became Chief Executive of Tideway. He set up an innovation programme on Tideway, copying the Crossrail approach. But Andrew Wolstenholme, Andy Mitchell, and others, all the senior managers, recognised there was a need for an industry-wide programme to support innovation, and they created something called the Infrastructure Industry Innovation Platform, or I3P, to actually, which was used the original platform from Crossrail for the industry. And you see here the platform supports, develops, and shares ideas between major projects with major clients and the supply chain. So ideas from all of these projects are now shared across, and sometimes there's an investment in similar problems that they might face. And this is, so Crossrail stimulated this approach. This slide helps us to stand back a little and reflect on some of the benefits of having innovation programs. The authors, me and others, of the innovation strategy identified 4 windows of opportunity for innovation in projects. The bridging window is where projects can bring in ideas from others and other projects and learn to set up the delivery model. The engaging window is where you use procurement and contracts to incentivize innovation. The leveraging window occurs after the contracts have been let, and this is where the innovation program can be used to leverage ideas from the supply chain. And this is what we did in Crossrail. And the exchanging window is where ideas generated on a project create a legacy and a pool of innovations that can be used on other projects. And that is the role of the I3P. And just for those who might be interested, we showed how the actual windows of opportunity can be mapped against conventional phases in the project lifecycle. And you can see here how each project is connected by an exchanging window and a bridging window between the different projects. And this is really what the digital platform has done for Crossrail in terms of the I3P that I talked about earlier. And if you're interested, these are some references, key publications which we wrote with practitioners, people involved in Crossrail, and it describes what we did on the project, and it shows how innovation can be used to improve the performance and outcomes of projects. So if you want some more information, go there, have a look, and you might find some more stuff that could be of value to you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Andy. Again, thank you for A, sticking to time, and B, for giving us a really nice overview of how some of these mega projects in the UK have innovated in a very formal and structured manner rather than in an ad hoc manner. And it was also interesting that parts of what you were saying connected to parts of what was saying, where it looks like innovation could be one of the routes through which you increase your cost-benefit ratio, and therefore you sort of end up adding value on these projects. I think there are some interactions between these presentations that we can talk about. So great, we're going perfectly on time. I'd like to now move to the next segment where we have a panel discussion. And in this panel, in addition to Nuno and Andrew, who you've already heard, we have two other eminent panelists who I'd just like to very briefly introduce. We have with us Sri Rajendra Prasad, who is Director Projects at India's National High Speed Rail Corporation Limited. I'm sure most of you know about this organization, but for the few of you who may not, India is now engaged in building its first high-speed rail, possibly the first of many high-speed rails that will follow. A very challenging vanguard project, as we call it, first of its kind. And Sri Rajendra Prasad is one of the people in senior leadership trying to make this project happen. So Rajendra Prasad ji, welcome to this webinar. Our next panelist is Shailesh Pathak, who has a very interesting and diverse background. Shailesh started off his career as a bureaucrat with the Indian Administrative Service and looked at mega projects from an administration perspective. Then he left the Administrative Service and went into the private sector, where for several years he looked at infrastructure financing. And now he is with Larsen & Toubro, which is India's largest developer of mega projects. And so he sort of looked at the administrative side of these mega projects, the financing side, as well as now the implementation side. So Shailesh, welcome and thank you for taking the time. Let me first start off by asking a question to Mr. Rajendra Prasad. So Rajendra Prasad ji, I think what Andrew was talking about in terms of innovation, I think is something that I think we realize that projects all over the world require innovation, right? We have to sort of keep reinventing, and particularly a project like the high-speed rail, which is the first of its kind in India. So I was wondering if you can talk to us about two things briefly. One, what is happening today in National High-Speed Rail with regards to innovation? And second, Andrew laid out a very formal mechanism that that mega projects in the UK are using, liaising with universities and having these review meetings every once in a while to bring out innovations that they can implement. What do you think about the ability to do something like that in a developing country context? So could you share with us some of your thoughts, sir? I believe you have a few slides to show as well.
Yeah, thank you very much for the nice introduction. The presentation by Dr. Nuno Gil and Professor Andrew has been quite interesting. And yeah, it is very, very important that the mega projects, all the projects and especially the mega projects are completed in cost and time. And it's a really very big problem, big challenge in India also, and in Indian Railways also. A lot of projects are suffering on this account, and maybe all over the world. But in this regard, I will just like to highlight one of the project which a shining example of sticking to the time and cost. It was in 2000 when I was in Delhi Metro. And a lot of questions were being asked in the media about the so much of spending in Delhi at that time, approximately 30,000 crores. People were asking that with these 30,000 crores, you can have super thermal power stations in India where there is no power at all. it is a power-starved country at the time. But once the project was delivered in time and cost, the first phase Delhi Metro, it was delivered, and now you see today what is the impact. Now after that, once it was delivered successfully, every state is demanding the metro, and now at present I think 17, 18 projects of metro projects are working in India, are in progress. So just to emphasize that for the each and every leaders which are in charge of the mega projects, it is very, very important to stick to the time and cost. Similarly, it is also very important for the HSR at the same phase we are in the HSR, in which I was talking about the Delhi Metro in 2000. Here also, if we deliver the first project of HSR in the time and cost which has been stipulated, then obviously, as it has been, Ashwin has told that a lot of metros are going to come. We are already having the study for the 7 HSR routes in India. At present, already this and DPR will be completed by that. But all depends upon how we complete this project. Now, just I think just share the screen about the. I think this is just the giving a alignment of this HSR who are not aware of this. It is in Western part of this country. It is from Mumbai to Ahmedabad.
Sorry to interrupt, but could you go to full screen mode, please, so we can see it's a bit bigger. Thank you. Perfect.
So this is total for 508 kilometer. Out of this, 460 is viaduct. Especially the viaduct is we have directed because there were a lot of resistance of the earthen embankment. So ultimately it was changed to viaduct. And then 25 kilometer is tunneling, out of which 7 kilometer is under sea. This obviously designed for 320 kmph. There are 12 stations, and the total cost of the project is 1,08,000 crores, and it is being funded by the Japanese loan, 81% of the cost. Now I will come to the current status of the project. Out of the 508 kilometer, the contract for 325 kilometer viaduct, 6 number of stations, and 28 steel bridges has been awarded recently in November 2020, and the work is in full swing. So approximately 65% alignment, the tender has been awarded. For the balance area, for the tunnel, 21 kilometer BKC station, and for the track, the tender have been floated and are under finalization. For the electrical signaling rolling stock, the tender will be floated shortly. Now coming to this innovation or new thing which is being done for the first in India, obviously it has been told that it is the first high-speed rail system. In general conventional system, we don't have these type of features. For earthquake monitoring, we are having 22 seismometer on our tracks. The rail temperature will be monitored, the wind pressure will be monitored, and the rain gauge will be monitored. And all these are being monitored and relayed to our control center directly through the SCADA, so that anything happens, then obviously the train can be stopped. And this is the item which is coming for the first time in India. Then there has been the LIDAR survey, which has been done for the first time for the railway project approximately 3 years back. So we could complete the survey of entire section. Some of this is total forest area and rocky area. So it was very difficult to access that, but we could complete this with this new technology of the LIDAR in 3 months. Now this technology, although it is very popular in the power sector, but first time has come to railway, and now it is being utilized in all other projects also. Then there was one issue of this underground. We are having 7 kilometers this tunnel under sea. So how to find out the geotechnical features of the rock there. So for that, static refraction tomography was done with the help of the this Japanese company, this Kawahasi, and this is also the first time it has been done in this project. This will help in basically if you do boreholes, Then during the tunneling, this will create a problem and the water may ingress. So this is the technology which has been used. This is another is we have our Ahmedabad and at Sabarmati and Baroda, we are integrating with the Indian Railways. So there is a very little space to, in the length of say 5 to 6 kilometer, there is no space to construct, very little space for conventional foundation. So Sinjo pile construction method, which is will consume very less space, that we are adapting. That is also a system which is very popular in Japan. So this is also be innovation for the Indian India, and I think the Indian construction companies can utilize this method in future in other projects. As I have already told that the 460 kilometer of this is in viaduct, and if we do the viaduct as per the segment construction methodology which is being used at present in metro, then it will take a long time. One span takes 7 days, but obviously with this now the timeline in which we want to do, we will be using the full scale launching system with this 1,000 ton load of the girder is there. So it's a huge this girder to be fully to be launched. So this type of technology will be used. This will be also coming for the first time in India. Sorry. In addition to this, we have also incorporated a high-speed innovation center in January 2019, in which we have taken the help of the 8 IITs and JR East, the Japanese JR Institute, JRTT, Japanese expert and Indian expert, and they are the part of this HSR Innovation Center, and we have taken 5 projects in this so that we can utilize the undertake the research and development in the field related to the high speed and focus into develop technology so that indigenous and cost-effective and world-class technical capabilities in the area of high speed is developed in India. So these are some of the projects. For example, the viaduct is very costly at present. So instead of viaduct, whether a retaining earth retaining wall, which is widely being used in the highways, whether that can be used in the this HSR system. This is one project. Then others are the simulation of the power supply and simulation of the OHE pantograph. Then similarly, the study on the indigenization of the HSR, mainly furnishing project these items which are being study for the fire safety and fire retardant of them. And then there is a CAM, cement asphalt mortar, which is being used under the slab track in the Japanese technology. So there is also a studies going on how to Indianize this. These are some of the innovation which we are taking into the project. I think, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, sir. I think it is very clear from your presentation that high-speed rail is doing a lot of things innovatively. And I think while I'm not sure we'll have the time to do this today, at some point, it would be interesting to see the kind of innovation strategy that you have in terms of collaborating with universities, bringing in new technology, and the kind of innovation strategies that Andrew Davis was talking about that we saw on Crossrail and elsewhere, just to sort of see if there is some two-directional learning that both organizations can learn from looking at each other's strategy. But thank you for that presentation. Let me move over to Shailesh. Shailesh, I'm sure Nuno's presentation would have resonated, quite well with you. Nuno, by the way, the triangle you talked about, I've heard several people in India referring to it as the iron triangle, right, not the golden triangle, because of its inherent rigidity. So, Shailesh, it seems to me that at the very high level, we talk about all kinds of benefits, economic benefits, social benefits. But when rubber meets the road, so to say, and you actually start constructing, that narrative disappears, and we get into this time, cost, scope kind of narrative. And the project manager's job is to try to finish that scope as quickly as possible within budget, which makes it difficult for us to create this kind of value and absorb innovation. How do you think, so it's a bit of a conundrum, given your vast experience in the Indian context, how do you think these kinds of mega projects ought to be governed so that we can not only finish time, cost, etc., but also create as much value as we can?
Thank you, Ashwin. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, loud and clear.
Right. Just a very quick comment. I actually started my career in Bombay with a development finance institution called ICICI. And after 4 years, I joined the government. So it's good to be back in Mumbai. And very quickly, we should actually look at this over the 4 stages broadly of any infrastructure life cycle project. So the first stage, according to my understanding, is design. And that is where most of the conflict for the future gets created because we do not design enough. The second stage is financing. If you can't find the money, it's not going to get constructed. The third stage is actual construction, when you put those safety jackets and wear helmets and go and get it constructed. And the fourth is operations. And I'm very happy, Andrew's presentation actually talked about the integrated life cycle approach, whereas most of us talk about only the construction phase. And a lot of the innovation that Andrew talked about in the leveraging and the exchanging actually happens in the operations phase. And I can give you examples of mega projects in India in the operations phase that have innovated. But going before that to your presentation about the hikes and cost hikes and delays in time are the norm actually, and this is not just India, this is universal. Having said that, let's just focus on 2 success stories. We got 2 success stories from the UK, Terminal 5 and Crossrail. Let me talk about 2 success stories from India. And Rajendra Prasad ji has already spoken about the Delhi Metro. I would actually talk about the Bombay-Pune Expressway, the Mumbai-Pune Expressway, which was an outstanding example of good project completion and execution within time and within cost. Now, my understanding is that such projects in the Indian context rely a lot on very dynamic and effective leadership. So in the case of the Delhi Metro, we had an outstanding project execution person called Mr. E. Sridharan. And in terms of the Bombay-Pune Expressway, we had a very good leader driving the the Maharashtra State Road Development Corporation. And what these people do is that they are boundary spanners. So, they span boundaries of construction, of financing, of dealing with stakeholders. And maybe in terms of future mega projects in India, and my belief is that more will happen in India in the next 10 years than whatever has happened in the last 30 years. So our mega project professionals need to be boundary spanners. How do you take into account the different priorities for different stakeholders? And let me just talk about an earlier railway project in India, which has not been completed in time and cost, and that is the dedicated freight corridor of India. So you have an eastern dedicated freight corridor and a western. And the disclaimer is that our company, Larsen & Toubro, is one of the largest construction partners for both the dedicated freight corridor and the high-speed rail. So we have skin in the game. What could we do better going forward is spend more time on the design aspect. And this is something that the dedicated freight corridor has done. This is something that the high-speed rail has done. It is better to spend more time in the design than to tender in haste and repent in leisure. But going forward, beyond construction, we have to think of the operations phase and innovations within that operations phase. So now that the western dedicated freight corridor is close to completion, now we are getting into the innovation phase in the operations that we can do. And in terms of an earlier speaker said, how can you increase the social value? So there are these 2 concepts called internal rate of return and economic rate of return. For a mega project, the internal rate of return will always be lower than the economic rate of return. But that's something that the private sector is oblivious to. That is something that public policy demands from the government, that economic rate of return has to be factored in when you evaluate a project. So I just conclude by saying that in the successful projects that we have seen, economic rate of return has driven the outcomes rather than internal rate of return. I like the idea of a railway station and the social value of that railway station contributing to the city's urban regeneration. My favorite example is how European cities, the railway station is the nucleus of and the hub of economic activity. How can we replicate that using railway station development and redevelopment in India? The second is there will be cost overruns, there will be time overruns because a whole lot of things are not within our control, especially in the pre-construction activity. It's once, building a metro system in Hyderabad and London are pretty much the same thing once you put on those yellow safety jackets. It is what you do before that that is very different depending on the local environment. Example from Japan, the Shinkansen was commissioned in 1964. Now the pre-construction activities between, let's say, 1950 and 1960 that the Shinkansen required are very different from the pre-construction activity that the Mumbai-Ahmedabad high-speed rail is currently undergoing. So that is more a local context. And finally, I think there is an incentive to under budget and increase the costs as you go along. And that's unfortunately more a universal phenomenon. It is not restricted to the government or the private sector. But I really like the example of Terminal 5, which was a very successful in time and in cost project. I also would seriously recommend the kind of documentation that has happened in the UK experience. Similar documentation needs to happen, let's say, from the Delhi Metro exercise. You're absolutely right. The Delhi Metro led the way to at least 13, 14, 15 metros being constructed all across India. And we are pretty much in the same phase where Europe was in, let's say, the 1890 to 1920, when there was a competitive metro building spree in European capitals. That's what's happening in India. So all the more reason that seminars like this on mega project governance and innovation matter for the decade to follow. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Shailesh. I think a couple of key points there. I think you touched upon leadership, which I think Andy also talked about when he talked about the role that Andrew Wolfenstone and people like Mark Thurston and others played on this project. You also talked about the design phase, which we academics often call the front end, or in some cases, the fuzzy front end of the project, which we don't focus on enough. And of course, there's this notion of needing to focus more on the economic returns, or as Nuno put it, the socio-economic returns, right? More than just the financial returns. I've got one question each for Nuno and Andy, after which we'll probably move to an audience Q&A. Nuno, now that you've listened to both Sri Rajendra Prasad ji and Shailesh, you talked about the ESG framework and how that might be sort of the way we frame these kinds of projects. But in practice, when governments are looking at budgets, when the private sector is looking at profitability, when bankers are looking at IRRs, how do we actually make this transition? Any thoughts from your side? How do we add that social value?
Well, I think we are seeing changes, and one good example comes from the UK with the recent Oakervee review, which I encourage you to download. It's available on the internet. And the Oakervee review was commissioned by the UK government when faced with calls to cancel ISP2, as the budget was spiraling, and it seemed like the project was out of control. And what the Oakervee review says is that our current metrics are misaligned with the expectations from the environment. Now, so we only measure economic gains and wider economic gains, and we have key stakeholder groups demanding that high-speed railway solves all the problems of the world. So they want this was to the extent that London was budget. The station in London Euston was budgeted as a 1.2 billion station, And these days is a 4.5 billion station, because suddenly the local state authority said, well, you know what, we have not modernized London Euston for 50 years. So if we are going to build a station adjacent to the existing one for high-speed 2, it's better that we modernize also the old one. And the stakeholders have very legitimate claims, and they have critical resources without which the project cannot happen, because they have planning consent authority. So if you do not agree, you are going for a massive fight, and it's likely that you lose. So the Oker review says we have to put less emphasis on traditional cost-benefit analysis, and emphasize more the narratives and the purpose. And ultimately, when Shavesh was calling for, we don't do enough design, I think it's even before that. Our big problem these days is we don't have enough discussion about the purpose of the project. Why are we doing what we are doing? So if we have that discussion of purpose, then we can have, from that discussion, we can have a discussion about what social value we want to create, what economic value, what we want to create, and then the design follows. So right now, what we have is people have to find mechanisms to survive. So we have a lot of, because of this obsession to stay on cost, at the same time, there's lots of pressures to decarbonize, to create more social gains. What people create is additional budgets. We call it sometimes designated funds. And so basically, then we have these almost cynic narrative that we say the project is on time and is on budget, but actually what we are, because we know we have to make all these concessions to create social gains, we have another pot of money from designated funds that we will draw from in order to finance the concessions to the stakeholders. And so we can say that it's still on budget, but actually the scope has increased, and rightly so. In the UK, we have a nice example of Project Speed, which is acceleration of projects in order to catalyze economic growth after Brexit. And again, if you read all the policy around Project Speed, which comes from number 10, they say, let's stop with all this silliness of traditional cost-benefit analysis. Otherwise, we will not be able to justify the measures that we need to do to accelerate these projects. So less emphasis on cost-benefit analysis and way more emphasis on purpose. And acknowledge that these projects evolve organic. Crossrail, it's a success, it is. But if you look to the headlines on the press, they keep saying, well, the project was supposed to open in 2017. It's 2021 and it has not yet opened. Of course, it has not opened, but the narrative, the purpose changed dramatically after the financial crisis, when the politicians looked to Crossrail and said, well, Crossrail needs to be an engine of economic recovery after 2011. And so basically said, we need to use Crossrail to create more jobs, local jobs, to encourage, to boost local manufacturing, and all that costs money. And created massive delays, in particular in the procurement of the rolling stock, because there was massive pressure to make sure that the trains would be manufactured in the UK. That added lots of delays. Those delays came because the purpose of Crossrail changed. So we see lots of changes in the UK, and the Oker review was a massive change in the paradigm, and Project Speed now is fundamentally shows that the paradigm is shifting towards, let's talk about purpose first, from purpose talk about distribution of value, get the distribution of value right, and then design it.
Thanks, Nuno. I would also appreciate it if in the chat box you could type out the precise name of that review so that we can Google for it and look at it. So Yeah, but one question to Andrew, and then we'll move into the audience Q&A. Sorry, we're running a few minutes late, but I think we'll catch up. Andrew, again, just sort of piggybacking on this discussion, there's two kinds of innovations, right? There's the very incremental innovations which are focused on improving maybe the productivity of a certain construction process and so on. But there are also these more systemic innovations that tend to create a lot of the kind of value that we are looking at, social value, etc. I'm just wondering, based on your experience studying Terminal 5, Crossrail, and all of these projects, how did these organizations, if at all, go about creating that kind of systemic value through systemic innovation? You're muted, Andrew. You might want to unmute.
Yeah, sorry, that classic thing. Yeah, it's a very good point, and it's linked to the the front end, or the fuzzy front end, the design phase. I mean, the key wins are, as Shailesh was saying, that you've got to design, and it links to Nuno's point. You've got to design to create the right kind of level of value. This is way beyond cost time issues, and it's these are significant levers of economic value in cities if they're carefully designed, and they're often not carefully designed. I mean, it's interesting to know all about this. Euston is less than a mile away from St Pancras and there's the other major station, and there are real problems with linkages between those two areas, and that could have been more carefully thought through. So too often we think of these projects as islands, as not connected in a way to generate the kind of systemic sort of value that you're talking about. So the things are in the design phase, and they are the strategic things, both in terms of the project and the project's wider connections to other phases. What we were talking about was, because these projects are so long, 5, 10, 15, 20 years, you mustn't freeze the innovation in the design phase and not unlock it later on. It needs to be unlocked all the way through to deal with all the sorts of, and it isn't just risk, it's opportunity. In Crossrail, the iPad, I mean, we think of it as commonplace now, but that was basically implemented, adopted and widely diffused when the project was underway. After 2 or 3 years, the whole project was on an iPad and everybody was walking around. So you need to take advantage of all these innovations that occur. And they will also be to address the kind of stakeholder issues that Nuno was talking about as well. I think, interestingly, for me, the kind of connection between innovation and stakeholder value and wider economic value creation and capture are something that we could have a really interesting discussion about. But I'll leave it for others to talk about.
Thanks, Andrew. I think what we'll do now is let's move into questions from the audience. Veronica, if you can share the Menti screen with questions, take a look at how many they are. One request I have from the panelists is that in order to enable us to take as many of these questions as possible, I'd suggest that if you would like to respond as briefly as you can, so we can move in to as many as possible. Okay, this seems to be more of a comment, planning and execution. Yeah. Shailesh, this is a question to you, but I think Rajendra Prasad ji can also answer, as can Nuno and Andy, because I know they've done PPP work as well. Do you think PPP can be a game changer, particularly in rail, high-speed rail? What are your thoughts?
So we are very proud in Larsen and Toubro of our Hyderabad Metro, which is an outstanding urban infrastructure to the city of Hyderabad. It's the second largest metro system in India after Delhi, 69 kilometers, fully operational. Having said that, Finance 101 is that risk and return go together. And if the risks are high, we in the private sector will price the return expectations much higher. And in my mind, there is no doubt that the best way to handle early stage construction risk is for the sovereign and the state to bear that risk. So I've been talking about reverse BOTs, where you use government money to construct, and once it is constructed and the cash flow visibility is there, you offload it to the private sector for operations and management. And thankfully, this is what the government is doing right now in terms of the monetization of current operating assets. Now, take, for example, the Shinkansen again. It was built using government money. And once it was commissioned, it took a good 20 years before it was given over to private parties to operate and maintain. So I would say that the Mumbai-Ahmedabad high-speed rail, the best way to do it is for the government to build it as it is doing now using private sector contractors. 100% of construction is from the private sector contractors. Once 2 years of cash flow visibility is there, that is the time to go for PPP, and you will get far more money than we spent actually in constructing the HSR. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Shailesh. Would anyone else just like to add on to that? I think that's a pretty clear perspective on that. Construction through the public sector and maybe the operations and maintenance once it's proven, perhaps with private assistance.
Construction through the private contractors, money from the public sector.
Sure, sir. Thanks. So maybe we can move on to the next question then and try to get in as many questions as possible. Okay, so this is an interesting question, and I think some of Shailesh, you also touched about it in terms of the boundary spanning capability. People who are working in high-speed rail today have to have a certain set of capabilities that perhaps were different from those who are working in traditional railway projects 20, 30 years ago. What kinds of capacities would you recommend that people have for these projects to be successful? Maybe Rajendra Prasad ji, you could talk about this a little bit. Sir, you're muted.
Yeah. This about the capacity building or training. Actually, it is HSR project. This has come for the first time in India. So obviously we are deep into it. It is being done at different levels. Just I would like to give the example. For one is the training of the NHRCL officials at Japan. Second, that is obviously done in most of the projects wherever it is being done. Second is here we have, for example, the track construction is being done, this type of track for the first time. So we have made a provision that earlier, because before COVID, we had the intention that from the contractor side, there will be 70, 80 people, his supervisor will be sent to Japan, will be given a 2 months training or 3 months training, and then they will come here. However, now we have reversed the way. The Japan JRTS is coming to India, and they will be training the people here, not only supervisors, but all the workers also for the track, which is a very special technology. So this is one aspect. I will, because time is limited, so I will not go into detail what we are doing, but we are taking care of this. Now, other aspect is the contractors. Our contractors, they have taken the training of because they also need the trained manpower so that your quality improves and safety improves. So they are also picking the people who have been our emphasis on mainly, which are the project affected people. They are trained, they train them. They are having the training center in Ahmedabad and even Chennai and other places, and they train. And then these people can be used for the HSR, this project. And also these people, once they are trained, they will be assigned for the other projects also in future.
Thank you, sir.
Just I will like to add that in addition to this, for operation phase also, we have a big program in which because these type of experience is not available in India for operating the HSR. So we have a 1 year program for the people from the O&M people who will involve in the O&M to go to Japan and have it on the job training for 6 months there. And probably if the Japan side agrees for the more training, so that the real, the method of how the Shinkansen is more successful today, because how it's because of its people, how they are maintaining it, their culture. So that culture we want to bring it here. So for that also we are having a training system, MOU with the Japanese government.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I think the organizers have just informed me that we have 2 minutes left for this, so we'll probably take one more question. Veronica, can we go to the next question? Okay, I think can we move on to another question? Okay, I mean, I've tried to look for something a little broader. I think all of these are very interesting questions. Okay, I think let's sort of maybe close with, or maybe go to the next question, the next one. Okay, so I think this is a question that I'd like everyone to give their brief thoughts on, which is in the context of a country like India, where we actually have done mega projects in the past, we have some capability, but yet it is a large country, many different value systems and so on. In terms of delivering value, in terms of delivering innovation, how do you think we should go about it? Maybe quick closing thoughts from all of our 4 panelists. We'll go in the order of presentations. Maybe you could start first.
Say exactly what you want us to
So
address.
on this question, which is the kinds of strategies that India should adopt for delivering mega projects and creating value and innovating, what are your quick takeaways on the kinds of strategies that you think India could do well to implement?
Okay, so I think it would be a multi-pronged strategy in a way. So I think there's a strategy in terms of educating the public at large as to how large infrastructure projects create value. I think there's a lot of work to be done there in terms to remove this perception that large projects create white elephants, to try educate the public as to why they behave the way they behave. So influence the environment, change expectations in the environment in regards to how these projects should behave and why they behave the way they behave. And of course, invest a lot in training. There's a lot of frameworks these days that qualified people, and the pandemic made us aware that we can reach out lots of people without necessarily having to travel, and so we have leverage and harness the technologies that we have today for virtual learning in order to broaden the scope and the range of people that you can train. So there are different levels of training, and there's a lot we can do now these days that in the past we could not do. And India is such a large country, so in that sense, technology, you can harness it to reach out and train more people. And of course, I'll trade. And then from a policy perspective, you just steal from people that are facing these problems and perhaps have already developed some are going ahead in developing innovative policies. So I would look to Project Speed, policies around Project Speed in the UK, because in a way it's kind of, perhaps it is the most contemporaneous, reflects the most contemporaneous thinking as to how democracies can speed up the development of infrastructure whilst attending to all the legitimate interests of key stakeholder groups. So we can do a lot of that, and so there's no reason why India cannot just leapfrog a lot of the obstacles that advanced economies have faced and develop policies that mirror the best knowledge and insight that we have currently available as how to develop projects in modern democratic societies.
Thanks, Nuno. Maybe Andrew, 30-second response.
Yeah, right, quickly. As Nuno said, there is no one size fits all. Whatever you do needs to be tailored to the Indian context with the Indian capability. And there'll be interesting, others in the world will be interested in what's going on in India. But learning from other projects is key. Creating knowledge sharing. It doesn't have to just be in the UK or the US. It could be across borders. And I think, there's so much to learn from other projects, and that needs to be brought in.
Thanks, Andrew. Shailesh, again, quick 30-second.
Continuation, what Andrew said, I think pinching ideas that have worked is always good. From the perspective of the private sector, we have an outstanding L&T Institute of Project Management, and we have actually become leaders in digitalizing the construction and design framework. The private sector's flexibility in rising to the occasion, including developing capacity and professional skills, is far higher. I would say the same skills hopefully will be exhibited in a larger scale by the governments. Thank you.
Thanks, Shailesh. Rajendra Prasad ji, your final concluding thoughts on this, what India should do?
Yeah, I think I have this is regarding the professional skills and particularly workers. What is the question? In this regard, I have already stated that what we are doing in MHSR, and I think this is India has a large pool of young population, which is they are qualified, but then only the skills needs to be improved to fit to the particular project or particular technology. So that is a combined effort from the government and the private sector will lead in the proper direction.
Thank you, sir. So thank you. Thank you to all the panelists. So that brings us now to the end of this very interesting session. I'm sure we could have gone on for another hour or so, but unfortunately, because of time constraints, we have to limit ourselves. But there's a lot of interesting discussion. I'm not even going to attempt to summarize it now. We will have some kind of a written document out later. But I think, just to sort of quickly put some kind of a conclusion to this, I think value capture is extremely important. I think all of these projects are being built because they should create social and economic value. And I think innovation is going to be a critical tool in helping us deliver that value. And innovation, I think we've learned today, doesn't just narrowly apply to a slightly better technology, but could apply to ways in which we rethink the project process, ways in which we reframe the narrative of the project to bring stakeholders on board. I think we need innovation across the board to create value. That's the key message. And with that, I'd like to again thank all the panelists for taking their time to attend this discussion and share their views. And I'd like to hand it back over to the organizers. Thank you very much.
Thank you to our panelists for an insightful discussion, and thank you to Professor Ashwin for his excellent moderation. Now I invite Mr. Haruhiko Kono to deliver his closing remarks.
Yes, good evening to all from Japan, and thank you very much for participating in ADBI-JARTS co-sponsored policy dialogue. ADBI and JARTS learning series on high-speed rail today. And my name is Haruhiko Kono from JARTS. I'd like to say a few words as closing remarks. This learning series is aiming at promoting the development of HSR construction and operation by sharing knowledge on planning, design, construction, operation, and maintenance of HSR, and through conducting policy dialogues based upon the lessons obtained from the diverse experiences. I'd like to thank Mr. Sonobe of ADBI and everyone at ADBI for their efforts in preparing for and holding of this session. Today, Professor Jill from UK gave a presentation on governing mega projects, and also Professor Davies from UK gave a presentation on innovation in mega projects. These presentations illustrate the challenges, delays, and the cost overrun involved with the mega projects, and provide insights and suggestions for implementation of the projects. The discussion part was moderated by Professor Ashwin Mahalingam and participated by Shuri Prasado, Professor Jill, Professor Davis, and Mr. Pathak. The discussion shed light on various key points relevant with mega projects and give implementations for a solution. Today's subject matter is and has been very common and fundamental in the countries where which plans to implement the mega project. And I found today's discussion very interesting, and actually the substance of today's discussion was really exciting than I would say than expected. And I'd like to thank again for all the participants today, and JARTS would like to continue this initiative in collaboration with ADBI, and we look forward to your continued cooperation. Thank you all for your participation today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Very much.
Thank you all. Thank you to the participants.